Great. Well, he is indeed. Thank you so much, Zach and team. And Zach, you're out of place up there today.
I know.
You're the only one not with blonde hair, I'm noticing.
I was going to dye it between services, but I just ran out of time.
Yeah, next week he's coming back with bleached blonde hair. That'd be fun. Great to be here with you guys all this morning. We're going to be taking a look at Matthew chapter 7 this morning. If you want to open your Bibles up and follow along, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24 in just a minute here. Before we do that, every couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, we try and get away to the Oregon coast as a family. I love it so much out there. It's beautiful and a lot of fun stuff to do. And we've done the camping thing. We've stayed in a hotel out there. But our favorite thing to do is stay in an Airbnb, like a rental house. And we've found out that when you go with friends or with extra family members, that you can get some pretty fantastic houses for much cheaper than a hotel when you split the cost with everybody. So this last time we went, this was a couple of years ago, with my parents, all of my siblings, and nieces and nephews, and our kids. There were 9 children and 9 adults. We're trying to find a house that could accommodate everyone. And then, of course, we're trying to pick a rental house that's going to be, awesome for everybody who goes. So what we decided to do was give everybody kind of your top priority, your number one thing. And then we try to compile all of those things and make a decision what's going to work best for everyone. And so we got things back like it has to have an Xbox, it has to have a game room, it has to have a pool table, it has to have a hot tub, all of this kind of stuff. And I'm like, how are we going to find all of this in a rental house? But my wife's number one thing always, anytime we go and we rent a beach house near the coast, is that it has to be right on the beach. Like, it can't be a block away. It can't be a couple blocks away. It can't have the most spectacular ocean view. You need to be able to open the back door and step onto the sand. Like, that's her number one requirement. We weren't able to find that with all of our other requirements in there, but that's her thing. Like, that's the number one thing she wanted, which is really, really great for vacation. But I think if I was building a house and wanted to own a house, that would not be the smartest place to put a house, as we also find out here in Matthew 7. So we'll turn to verse 24 if you want to read along here. This says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish person who builds their house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority, not as the other teachers of the law." So last week, Jeremy started this new series on the power of story. And I'm really excited for today's message. We're going to have the opportunity to hear from 2 people here in our congregation, from Jordan Kiler, who's our high school youth director, and also from Ron Rogers, who helps to lead the services over at the terraces. And one of the coolest things for me about this series is not only do we get to know each other here in the congregation as we hear from different people's stories, but we also are challenged to think, well, what might my life communicate to other people? What has God been doing in me that might help somebody else out in their circumstances? And how can my life be used to impact others? The way that the stories that we're going to be hearing impact us. So really looking forward to hearing from them today. And I think just as a quick introduction here, one of the reasons that stories are so powerful is because God is a storyteller at heart. God could have just created us and told us about his goodness, his power, his creativity, his love, his mercy, but instead he created us and allows us to experience his universe so that we can discover firsthand what it means to long for justice and to long for broken things to be restored, to experience mercy and to feel God's tremendous love, to see his creativity, his power, and all of that displayed in the world around us. God is a master storyteller, and the Bible is a story of people sharing their stories. This is people collecting their stories and sharing what God has done in them. And not only is God a good storyteller, But I think he's innately given us a desire to hear good stories and to root out which ones identify with those themes that help point us to God. Themes of justice and love and conflict, but good winning out over evil, those kinds of things. God's put that in us. It speaks to us on a deep, deep level when we hear those kinds of stories. And some of them actually have incredible specificity in terms of pointing us to God. Think of some of the stories like Superman or Hercules or even Harry Potter. These all feature like a godlike character that comes out of obscurity to experience some tremendous hardship, and even in these three examples, they die, but they're resurrected and they save the world in the end. Does that sound like somebody else's story to you a little bit? Every culture tells these stories, whether they were post-Christian or not, and the reason I think that these stories so clearly resonate in our hearts is because it is the story of God. And God's given us a desire to see him in the world around us. And so I'm excited about this series for those reasons. I think stories can be tremendously powerful. And Jesus always spoke in story. He told parables. And here, this short little parable, story of these two builders, it comes at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' greatest sermon. And he uses 5 different analogies to kind of throughout this sermon that he has here, 5 different parables, if you will. And this is the final one. And the people were amazed at the end of this passage. And it wasn't because he was such a great communicator, because he had such great charisma. It says that they were amazed because he spoke as somebody who had authority. Jesus said things like, "You have heard Moses say, but I tell you." And that was unheard of in their day, because the teachers, the scribes, the religious leaders, they would say, well, Jeremiah says, and then they would expound, and maybe they would give a little bit of commentary at the end, but they would never dare to say, I'm telling you this. And yet Jesus stood up in the church and he said, today these scriptures have been fulfilled in your midst, and I'm fulfilling them. Like they were about him. It says in Colossians, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. So when Jesus was speaking, people could tell that there was something different going on here. That Jesus was saying, this is all about me. When Jesus says there was a wise person who built their house on the rock, he's saying these are the people who put their foundation on my words. That's incredible authority that he was speaking with. He was saying there's only 2 responses to hearing my words, and one will end in destruction, and one will end in life. You can only have 2 responses to the things I'm telling you. You can listen to them, take them to heart and do them, or you can ignore them and carry on with your life, and destruction will be great for the person who does that. Jesus said, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? So we ask ourselves, what is your life founded on? Where is your foundation? I don't know if you've ever seen the show Storage Wars, but it's this reality show about people who buy storage units that have gone delinquent at auction. And for a variety of reasons, somebody dies or goes to jail or can't pay their bill. The storage unit sells the contents of the auction, the facility sells the contents of these units. And the highest bidder can take home all this garbage and sort through it and search for treasure. Well, I've shown up to a couple of these auctions here in town, and I've bought in a few of these units, and to be honest, most of them are filled with like cat pee and bed bugs and just the worst clothes and rotten food, and it's really quite horrible. Like, I paid $50 to clean out all this garbage for someone. But every once in a while, you'll find some interesting treasures. My sister got more into this than I have, and she just bought some units in Salt Lake a couple weeks ago. And for a couple $100, she got all this stuff out, and she just sold some Magic the Gathering cards for like $3,000 last week. So she's found a few treasures. But the thing that's interesting about this is it tells, each unit kind of tells a story. And it's usually a really sad one because somebody's storage stuff has ended up in default. But you have someone's entire life story in here. You have their baby pictures, you have their 4th grade report cards, you have their letters to, to their sweethearts in junior high and in high school. You have their diploma and their yearbooks and their marriage certificate and the divorce papers and all of this stuff in these storage units. And it tells a picture of someone's whole life. And usually they're pretty sad stories. But I wonder, what would our life tell others if we summed up our entire lives in an 8x12 locker? What would people say about us if we had to sum up our lives? And Jesus says, what good is it to gain the entire world and yet forfeit your soul? He says you need to make sure that your house is built on a firm foundation rather than the shifting sands of the world around us. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jordan's story here this morning. He's our high school youth director, as I mentioned, and he shares what his life was like before he found that firm foundation, and we'll go ahead and roll that clip here for you.
Hi, I'm Jordan Kiler. I am the high school youth ministry director at Eastwind Community Church, and here's my story. Growing up, I was really kind of into sports. That was my identity. Kind of identified with just sports, and that made me have a lot of friends, and it was good, it was fun. But things changed. My parents got divorced when I was in high school, and I kind of brushed it off. It was okay, but it really wasn't. And it really affected me in a lot of ways. Because I've always want to have friends and want to, be liked, obviously. I've always been a people person. But just growing up with lots of friends, and then my parents getting divorced kind of shattered some things. It was tough because my dad, he was an alcoholic, so that's kind of what put my parents in that situation. And I'm sure that maybe some of you guys has had something happen with your parents, or maybe it's alcohol, but it's other things that's running apart. But just that whole situation, I kind of just brushed under the table. And I went to college, and I kind of wanted to get away from it, and nothing really changed. I always thought I wouldn't drink, and I wouldn't be like my dad, or just doing drugs and other things in the world. And of course, the people I hung out with did those things, so of course I did them too. Just kind of got caught up in the world things, and it really wasn't me. Once again, I really didn't feel really welcomed, or I didn't feel like I had a purpose. So I just kind of got caught up in that, and it all kind of sort of crumbled down. It kind of happened probably this last year. I got to a stage where I was really depressed, and I prayed to God, and He answered my prayer. Goodness, I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I can't go through this. I can't continue drinking. I can't continue, being who I'm not supposed to be. And that's kind of who I identify myself with. I didn't know who I was, what my purpose was, and when I asked God, I just said these simple words. I said, "Can you help me, please? Can you help me?" And He really did answer my prayer. And in that moment, I felt, it's hard to explain, but I just felt God loving me, even though I was just so messed up and so far down low. And it was a really good moment. I felt like Jesus entered my heart right there, and the Holy Spirit just kind of coming on and just working in me. And after that, I've always kind of thought I've identified myself with Christ, and it's not with what's happened with my sports growing up. And I love sports today. Don't get me wrong, I love it. I love hanging out and doing stuff, but it's more myself. I identify myself as with Jesus Christ, and how He's my Savior, and He's what defines me. Not these other things in the world. These other things are great. Some of these things are good, but that it's Him first. And so I just want to let you guys know that whatever you're doing in this world, just remember that Jesus always comes first, and He loves you more than anybody else in this world ever will. And sometimes it's hard, you can't see it, but He really does.
Well, Jordan, have you decided to follow Jesus' teaching, leading, and His example in your life?
Yes, I have.
Have you received Him as your Lord and Savior?
Yes.
Well, it's based on this confession that I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son,
lot different now with Christ. To me, every day is a new day for new mercies, new grace, and God's love. And so I always have to start my day with God. Whether that's praying, getting into the Word. And I know God has a plan and a purpose for my life. Before, when I didn't know Christ, it was just kind of going through the motions, not really sure what my purpose is, why I'm here. But every day now for me is filled with meaning. Every interaction I have at my job as the East Wind High School Youth Director, that relationships matter, and everything that we do now matters on into eternity. My name is Jordan. Jesus is my foundation, and this is my story.
You satisfy us.
Yeah, how cool is that? Well, Jordan would encourage any of you who have not made that decision to put your trust in Christ to do so. I don't know if you've ever seen video footage of people who are caught off guard by flash floods or tsunamis. They could be walking on the beach and everything is hunky-dory and totally fine. The next thing you know, there's just this total destruction and everything is wiped away. But we're promised by Jesus here that hard things are going to come. And not only that, Jesus is talking about eternity. And he's saying that someday you'll have to give an account for your life. The other thing I want to mention about this is that, when Jesus says that the storms will come, the rains will come, the floods will come, and they'll hit both houses, he's saying that it doesn't mean if you become a Christian that suddenly your life is easy and that you will avoid all this hardship and you'll experience all this success. He's saying that hard times are going to come. But when your firm foundation is in him, it's going to help you to stand and to stand strong. And in Luke, when Jesus gives this example, he says that the foundation is dug down deep. Like in the Hellenistic world, they would dig basements and they would do that to shore up their foundations of their houses. We need to be constantly digging our foundation deep. And you've heard in the 80s where people were taking out personal ads and they would say about themselves, enjoys long walks on the beach. Many of us, I think, see the Christian life as a long walk on the beach, and then eventually we'll run back to the rock when we need to. But we need to spend time firming up that foundation and building and investing in that foundation, because that represents our lives. Quick story to share here for you guys. This last week, we've seen this coyote running around out in the back patio here. And on Tuesday last week, I watched him catch a rabbit or a mouse or something out of a hole out here, and he was eating it. I was like, that was pretty cool. And then he was just standing in the yard, and we needed to go over to the office. And I was like, well, we were a little nervous, but we opened the door and we're like talking to him, like, hey, buddy, don't eat me. I'm just walking through. And Mary saw him just a couple days ago out underneath her window in the office. She saw this huge dog, and she thought it was a German Shepherd or something. And then she goes, that is a healthy-looking coyote. But I was at a youth conference, and the speaker there was from Arizona, and he told this story of this a great amount of disappearances of pets that was plaguing this particular area. And they had an article in the newspaper saying, watch out for coyotes, they're stealing people's pets. And you need to be aware that they are sneaky and they hunt in packs. And so this guy was driving down the road and he saw a coyote out in the field. And so he pulled over and he was just watching this thing. And it came up to kind of the housing development there in the desert. And it found this little puppy in the back of this backyard of this house, and it started playing with it. And it was yelping and barking and running in circles around it. And the dog was playing back, and they were having a good old time. And he noticed the coyote was circling and getting further and further away from the house. And he looked across the field. He could see a small hill. And on the other side of the hill, there were 5 or 6 coyotes that were just lying there waiting for their buddy to go and bring them dinner. And thankfully, the owner of this dog jumped out of the back of the house and ran out there and got his pet and scared away the coyote. But the guy who was speaking, talking to the youth at this conference, he was saying, it matters who you're hanging out with. You get further and further away from the person that you want to be, and eventually you find yourself in disaster. And I think that's true for those who have built their foundations on Jesus, built their foundations on the rock. We enjoy those long walks on the beach because the sand feels so warm in our toes. And we eventually find ourselves getting further and further and further away from the things in our lives that matter. We need to continually invest in that firm foundation. And the next story that we have with us, Ron Rogers, is somebody who has done that. He has had a long ministry career. He's helped to plant and be involved in over 100 different churches through his years as a pastor and as a denominational ministry leader. And he's been married for 58 years to his beautiful wife, sitting over here, Doris. And Ron has faithfully helped us over at the Terraces, running the service over there. So tremendously blessed to hear from him today. And he's become a great friend of mine. When I was in seminary, he took on the job of being a mentor for one of the classes that I had to meet regularly with a mentor, and Ron's made a tremendous investment in me. So thank you, Ron. Would you guys welcome him up here?
Jesse, one more follow-us up on your coyote.
Yes.
A friend of mine lives in the condos just down the street. Had a beautiful four-legged cat. It's now a tripod.
Oh, yeah. Be careful.
The coyote's got it. 68 or 64 years ago, I was a high school senior, life planned out, medical doctor, schools I thought chosen, all was great. And I made a major mistake that radically changed my life. I made the mistake of going to church. I attended church with my sister, and there was a group of young people there that fell in love with me, and I fell in love with them. And they made it a point to have me in the service Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night youth. They kept me busy, but they were beginning to help God build a foundation upon which I could build. Well, within a 3-month period, I had made a commitment of my life to Jesus Christ. I'd been baptized. I'd made a commitment of my life to follow him wherever God wanted me to go. There was only one thing that I lost in all of this, and that was I lost about 3/4 of my vocabulary because I couldn't use those words anymore. I was a part of that church for about a year and grew, but became restless. And I went to my pastor and I said, I want something to do. Responsibility. He said, son, just stay in that Sunday school class where you are and learn all you can. Well, I figured I'd learned all I could. So I said bye-bye to that church and joined another church the next Sunday. Little did I know when the youth Sunday school director came by and said, I want you to be my assistant. Okay. Almost immediately, the junior high discipleship person came by and said, I want you to be my assistant. Okay. And then almost immediately, the youth choir director came by and said, youth choir tonight, 5:00. Okay, my daughter would never believe I sung in a choir for 2 years. But that church began to lay that foundation. And then the pastor came by and he said to me, as I went into his office, he said, see this library here, son? If I'm not here, it's yours. Use it any time, day or night that you want to. That pastor began to mentor me and to build and strengthen that foundation. If we had a new program we were going to be doing in that church, he pulled me aside. He taught me ahead of time of what was going to be happening, why we were doing it, and the steps. And he gave me a good education. And he built and helped build a strong foundation. 2 years later, I found myself as pastor of a church, 21 years of age. That don't work, but it did. A great congregation. Full-time college student and working 2 jobs. Now that'll build character, but it keeps you busy. But out of that, God had built under me a foundation of commitment to each other. And there we were. Well, that's led me a lot of different directions. 8 years in Chicago as pastor and working in denominational offices there with a group of churches. 31 years in Maryland, working with 3 different groups of churches there as language missions director, as Christian social ministries director, as black church relationships director, the opportunity to move in a multicultural area. Strange for this little boy from the country. Was it easy? No. Did I want to give up? Yes, a lot of times. But I always was able to come back to the foundation that had been laid and the commitment that I had made with Jesus Christ and that He had made to me. There was a foundation there. And I could always come back and say, but you said, and you promised, and we moved on. Jesse mentioned the number of churches that I've worked with. Gosh, hundreds of them, but I've helped start over 100 churches. Some of those churches exist today and some don't. But the ones that exist today exist because they were built on a foundation with a leadership that knew what they wanted to do and with a commitment to Jesus Christ. Those that did not have that, they died. I've worked with a lot of young men that wanted to be pastors. And today some of them are great pastors. And some of them are out of the ministry. What was the difference? Some had a foundation on which they built and was able to grow. Others started with a dream, but never put a foundation under that dream. Well, after 38 years, it was time to retire. 2001. But I retired with the same call that I had that led me into full-time ministry. I retired with a call to go back to Tennessee and to minister to family. And I went back there and for 13 years, ministered to my family. Well, 3 brothers, 2 sisters, 2 sister-in-laws, a nephew. I buried all of them. But God was there. I ministered. And then there came another call. A call to be Gramps. That brought me to Idaho. And my wife and I are Granny and Gramps. The 2 great kids. Oh, I get emotional at times. It's hard not to. But also being a part of East Wind Church, I talked with Mark. I wanted something more to do. And the Terraces, the ministry there was starting. And I had the opportunity of from the very beginning to be a part of the ministry with the Terraces. You never see me here. You see my wife and daughter here. But I'm always over to Terraces every Sunday, ministering with and through a group of people there of about 30 to 35 consistently. A lot of fun, a long time, and it's been good. Now, I missed my opportunity. My wife and I, well, my epitaph. I didn't get it put on my tombstone. because my wife and we bought the tombstone. It's paid for. It's in place. And we're just waiting for the final dates to be chiseled in. But my epithet would be, if our choice could be, is he helped a lot of people reach their potential. But I could never have done that and could never have helped them had my life not built and not been built on a firm foundation. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All else is sinking sand.
Well, it's so encouraging to. Sorry about that. Good. It's so encouraging to hear people's stories. We can learn from other people's mistakes, and some of you in this room have some pretty good mistakes that you can share with others to help them avoid some of the disasters in life. But the most powerful thing that we can do is to learn from somebody's good example. And so we need people like Ron in our lives that we can learn from and that we can and follow after. And so thank you so much for sharing. What an incredible story, and what a testament to God's faithfulness, to your faithfulness back to him. So you all have a story to share, and I want to encourage you as we're continuing on in this series to think about some people in your lives that might need to hear the good news of God's offer of hope for them. So think of some people that you might share your story with, and think of some things that God's been doing in you that you might be able to share with others. So I'm going to go ahead and invite the band to come on back up here, and we're going to close in a final song, but would you pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for offering us eternal life, for offering us the hope of salvation in you. God, I thank you for walking with us through the storms of this life. God, you haven't promised that all of life will be easy. You've allowed us to live and experience this story so that we can put our trust in you. God, I pray that people would dig their foundation in deep. That as you mentioned, with the vine that stays connected to or the branch that stays connected to the vine and will bear fruit, I pray that you would help us to stay connected to you. Like a tree planted by streams of water that yields fruit in due season, I pray that we would be rooted deep in your word and in the people around us that are also doing the same in prayer and in walking in step with your spirit. God, thank you for Ron's story. Thank you for Jordan's story, and I pray that you'd continue to use them to bless other people and to encourage them in their walks.